All right, super awesome. So we'll let people trickle in here for just a couple minutes before we actually get started. But one, so stoked to have this panel together, right? Like it's Jimmy and I started this conversation a few weeks ago, maybe a month. I don't know. You guys know how time goes, right? One day it's here, one day it's gone. Next day you're doing something else. But it was like, I think it was just a solid topic. And I was like, man, who do I know that's okay being a little controversial or a lot? And let's just tackle this subject and really kind of narrow this pig down. So this was the group. Um, Matt Lee, having you on, I couldn't resist having Topper on at the same time, right? And then
He's
Eric,
the better
obviously.
Matt. The other Matt, at least.
Well, in all internal and communications, I've been referring to you two as M&M. So
sure. I want to be the red M&M if I can, if we're calling it, But,
there you go. So yeah, it's going to be super exciting. So I think it's going to be super fun too, and I love this kind of stuff. So with that being said, let's just start off with basic introductions. Yeah. So Eric, like, who are you? Where are you from? What's your background? What state are you sitting in right now? And why do you have shoes on the shelf?
I mean, you don't put your J's on the shelf with a light behind it.
Right.
Well, you're doing it wrong, Tim. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I've been in the channel space since, I don't know, forever, but 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. Working primarily with MSPs on security initiatives. Now working at SOC Starter. We do SOC SIM and compliance work, focused on the MSP, VAR, and services space.
Awesome. Jimmy, you're up next.
Hi, my name is Jimmy Hatzel. I am in I work for QuickPass Cybersecurity, currently coming live from a phone booth-esque thing in the Robin Robbins event, Robin Robbins Roadshow. Have a background in cybersecurity, worked at, what some may call an MSSP before, we can get into that later, but just super psyched to be here with everyone.
Awesome. Topper, you're up.
All right. My name is Matt Topper. I usually just go by Topper. Work here at Gradient as our director of security. So overseeing things like internal InfoSec and software security, and have a background in the cybersecurity MSP industry, working with my friend Matt before this, and doing all sorts of fun and exciting things over at the MSP world, focusing on internal IT and InfoSec and that kind of thing.
Outstanding. So Matt Lee, you're going to be next. I'm going to add one little thing here. So do the same thing everybody else does, and then I want you to plug your beard contest, considering you're the biggest beard in the channel right now, I think.
Fair, not for long, however. Yeah, so thanks for having me on. Matt Lee, I'm the Senior Director of Security and Compliance at PAX 8. I was with Matt Topper as we had one massive security event that started the beginning of our MSP, and Matt and I were able to build probably one of the coolest things I've ever built in my entire life around cybersecurity and internal InfoSec. So Matt might be humble about it, but I won't let him. It was quite amazing to see what we built over there, and it was not many times to pat yourself on the back, but that's one of them. So that being said, I have a cybersecurity background from being punched in the face, was the predominance of how I learned it. We iterated through that, but I am shaving my beard for charity. It's go.cybermattlee.com/GoFundMe, or just cybermattlee.com, and you can go to shave that beard on the top navigation tree. But what we're doing is myself and 16 other gentlemen, very loosely defined, are shaving our beards for 5 different charities. One of them is Women Who Code. Another is Bits and Bytes, which is a 8th grader education around cybersecurity space. Diversity Cyber Council, which is a mid-city Atlanta kind of initiative to take some underserved populations and give them education. Hackers for Vets, which is if you exited with a clean DD-214 and you are wanting to go into the cyberspace, it is a somewhat unlimited scholarship towards that effort without any restrictions. And then the last one is Bike Walk Wichita, just because they move my heart. So shaving our beards for $100,000 in charity, which means each one of those would get 20,000. And we're right at, after commitments and stuff that isn't quite received yet, about $48,000 of that 100,000, without really hitting up many of my friends, maybe such as Radiant or something. That's a good friend of mine, but we'll get there. So anyways, thank you so much for having me, Tim. I'm excited about this topic. And I think this topic is one that is set up by poor nomenclature in a lot of what we do. And I think that there's some real good conversation to be had here today. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I am Tim Coach. I am currently the director of Kick-Ass for Gradient MSP. My particular background in security is specific more or less to banking. So I ran and rebuilt multiple MSPs in my career. And one of the things that we did focused on banking was obviously become security focused. We're obviously going to talk about that as well. That is who I am. And then, of course, we would be remiss if Miss Ola didn't introduce herself.
Hello, so my name is Ola and I'm the Senior Manager of Channel Engagement, and I'll tell you my goal today is to keep these guys in line. So I'll be moderating this session for today.
Good luck.
I guess to kind of kick us off, let's just start slow. So for everyone, what would you say are some of the main characteristics between an MSP and an MSSP in your opinion?
So let me jump in first, right? Because
all right, you go.
We talk about, like, I love to kick the elephant in the room. This horse has not been whipped enough. I'm going to whip it some more. I think, and this is where I'm just going to add, and then I want you four to go because you're really the security people here, is I think the whole MSSP thing is a loosely defined crock right now, if I could be blunt. And this is the reason why I'm saying that, is one, there's absolutely no legislation, no regulation, no checky mark. Like, I can't go out and get a list somewhere that allows me to be a certified MSSP. I go on one website. That's
not true. Panettiere will put you in there and then you're an MSSP. It says so right there in that list.
There you go.
Never mind.
But I go on one website and it says MSSP is network focused. Now, I'm a little bit older in my IT career, and I think there's 6 other layers of the OSI model that we need to be taken care of. Now, I go to another website and they say it is 100% outsourced. So I'm of the topic, based off the conversation Jimmy and I had, that MSPs are certainly and should be security focused, but an MSSP right now is a purely loosely defined catchphrase in our industry with no real direction. So with me kicking the elephant, I obviously, or whipping the horse, will hand over my whip to each of you to actually put in your 2 cents on this thing too.
All right,
I'll go next.
You go fine, Eric. I don't mind being.
I'll go next, and I'll be a bit of the opposite of that, Tim. I think you're right, because there aren't hardened certification policies in place to determine what is and what is not. You get a lot of people that are using these terms without maybe going through the process of understanding what it is that they're talking about. But that being said, I mean, if you look at the 2 definitions that you had, one being focused on the network and the other being outsourced or third party, I think broadly most would say that an MSSP is a third party or outsourced group that's focused on securing the network for business, right? For business groups. And I think that most MSSPs out there are working hard to do that job. What I'd like to think that we're going to discuss today are what are some of the challenges to get there, right? But I think that I'll be positive here, and I think that most are trying their best to understand the space, understand the challenges, to level up and to work hard. And I think as a community, we can all work together to foster that spirit.
So if you ask me to define MSSP, at least in the way it's used today, keeping in mind that I think we have some nomenclature and definition problems, but the way it's used today, I think, is indicating an organization that outsources the security decision-making to another party and likely outsources the actual implementation of those decisions. But really, it's a question of who is making the calls on what are you using for products, what does your security architecture look like, And, one of the issues we'll talk about is the issues with disconnecting that from the single SP. But at least if you're asking me, how is MSSP used and how is it defined? It's when you outsource security decision-making to another organization.
Yep. I can go next, or Jimmy, if you just want to wrap her up, I'll be the salacious one at the end. However you want to handle it.
Yeah, I'll just jump in real quick. To me, MSP, managed IT services, focused on the whole gamut of IT. Back in the day, cybersecurity was a part of IT. Eventually, it got pulled out into this separate thing, but it always is still part of an IT. You have to do patching. You have to have endpoint. You have to have MFA, all this. MSSP, managed security service provider. It implies that there is no IT happening at the company. Historically, MSSP meant SOC and SIM. Now it's expanded a bit, and there's different definitions of it. So I don't think it's a direct jump from MSP to MSSP, because why would you all of a sudden ditch IT services? You can be a security first MSP, surely, but I'll let you jump in on your diatribe now.
Touche. All right, here's what I'll say. I think this whole conversation is a symptom of an absolutely broken system. If you think back to the Industrial Revolution, a lot of the things and infrastructure that live in our world today didn't exist until 100 years later, right? If you look at a car, 1885, Ralph Nader's Unsafe at Any Speed, 1970 something, right? That difference of adding seatbelts to a car was 100 years later. So let's just be honest. We're in the same technology revolution where we've slapped together all kinds of crap to make our lives better and all kinds of things to drive technology. And to your point of Jimmy saying, technology used to include security. Nope. Technology used to mean here's some crap we throw in here because we can get extra margins. It had no understanding of security. And I think the definition of security is so broken by histrionics of marketing, all the things, right? If you look back during the Industrial Revolution and before, we had people that drove around in freaking carts and sold snake oil and people bought it. So my point is that we're so used to marketing companies and vendors saying, protect, we'll stop every threat. Does that even sound real? Does that even sound close to real? And so the challenge is, in my mind, you cannot touch the data and not be responsible for the risk you create within that organization around the data. And you cannot protect the data if you don't know what it is and where it is and what it's worth. And so the challenge that I find is I'm actually predicting a bit of a convergence in this. And that, yes, you may still find companies that do SOC as a service. And yes, Eric's team may still guide you through some amazing things. And yes, Jimmy may add security features and pieces, but I promise you, the quarterback will be the one that's getting the check. And I think what we're finding is the simplicity, the normalization, the ease of what we're doing around security and technology are starting to mean that as that world gets commoditized away from an MSP, as we didn't set IRQ ports anymore. I don't put a little jumper on a stupid card when I put it in, right? I don't do Exchange server disk management anymore. I don't do, as those commoditizations peel away and as that value drops, I'm simply positioning that MSSPs will either learn to do that very simply and scripted with robotic process automation and automation of technology, and advisory is the same advisory, and start to encompass some of these conversations around SaaS vendors and responsibility matrices and all the things that matter around security, or you will see MSPs grow up and start to have the same conversations. Now, there may be partnerships, they may be go-to-market models, there may be SOC as a service, there may be all these things, but I can tell you, you will not be the quarterback if you're not running the data and the security decisions. Now, back to Eric's point or Jimmy's of saying, oh, well, they help me pick the product, or they come up with the architecture. They have totally true. You certainly have expertise capabilities around that. But if I apply all that and your shit's in Dropbox, didn't help. And I think the conversation's coming in that we have to have a more holistic understanding of the efforts of security. There are frameworks out there that'll teach you. There are people out there that'll teach you. And I just feel like that what MSP, MSSP is a symptom of the changing understanding of what our breadth of security in this technology is. Just like saying we had to have 16 inches on studs in houses. Then when people didn't do it because the snow was caving the roof in, they had inspectors and they had people to follow that up. And you're seeing those same efforts play out in our world. And to put a final pin in it, Cercia.
Are we though? Are we seeing inspectors? I mean,
no, we're not.
Where's that coming from?
We're starting to see it.
That's actually a great point. I want to lead into that, and here's why. So I was an MSP. That's where I came from, right? So I started in like break fix world, like selling projects. Like engineers had to go what was it, 2 or 3 times their salary in order to justify themselves. And then later on, we adapted to the price per user model and started including things in there, right? But what we were really good at was providing that service, right? Now we can talk about that on a couple different things.
And
whether
getting
it's fully-
efficient, being, economical, making
Right.
money on it. Yep.
But what happened is, for me, what happened is I went from being an MSP that serviced pretty much anybody and everybody, right? And we can talk about the triangle and increasing your price later on if you want to. But the point being is we started specializing in security. The reason why we did that was primarily because we serviced banks. Here's where we talk about audits. If you're with a bank, if you're servicing banks, they go through audits and exams every year, and multiple. So that was really kind of the start as you focus more into that security focus versus I'm just providing IT services as a department. Is now I have someone that's, we used to say, a buddy of mine, one of the sales guys used to say, you can't let the prisoners check the bars.
Yeah,
I feel like
separation
that's
of
where
duty
we're
clauses.
at with the MSSP. Is the prisoners are checking the bars. There's no warden, there's no auditors, there's no one focusing us on what we should be doing.
But you are seeing that come. The Federal Trade Commission's False Claims Act by the Department of Justice has become the hottest sword being wielded, right? And what I mean by that is, because we know this is so broken, it's now going to come down to reasonableness, right? And the reasonable person rule, or it's called the reasonable man rule, but I'm trying to be more inclusive, basically says, if I put 11 of you in a box plus one more, and you all were sitting there and I'm explaining my actions, would you find them to be reasonable based on the contract? Would you find them to be reasonable based on what this merit body of evidence is? And so you start seeing this start with government contracts, right? Department of Justice sued Rocket Diet and Aerojet, $9 million. They started with a $90 billion lawsuit. 9 million. The inside whistleblower got paid 3 million. They made 30% of it, right? And so that's another piece of it. But you're starting to see mechanism of actions to bring this down to, well, at least you'd have a better answer of why you're doing. Well, if you look at a SOC as a service company saying, I handle the alerts and I deal with the alerts, how sensitive are they? What's the difference in the alerts? Which data do they have access to? Is that data regulatory? Does that data come into compliance and privacy? So to Eric, to your point of like, are we seeing it? We're starting to see the mechanisms of it begin to play out. We're starting to see a government struggling with those challenges. If you look at the track of CMMC and how bad that's been over the last few years, you look at DOJ and the Federal Trade Commission methodologies. SEC just came out with a proposed regulation saying you must have 4 hours to support a material incident. Like, you're starting to see the actions of an economy and capitalism say, I'm going to find ways to kill the ones that aren't and drive forward the ones that are. And that kind of concept is this concept of risk. And so MSPs have traditionally focused on, right? Thanks, Vincent. Traditionally MSPs have been focused on high proficiency, on good user experience, on tying in technology and tying in stack. And then they started trickling in those things that hurt them, right? 3389 ports being open, we did VPNs because they were attacking. But we've never stepped back and said, what does it take to take a bell curve of security and deal with it? And so if you look at like just implementing CIS, right? And you're saying, okay, control one, I want to know where all my assets are. Is that going to be an MSSP? Are they going to be the ones to have the processes to roll out assets? Oh, no, that's the MSP. They do that. Oh, great. Well, who's responsible? Which one does that land on? Who's going to own that? And so all I'm saying is I think MSP, MSSP, we're arguing over the short hairs, when in reality, the long term is really that we're all going to see a merger in this where you cannot be responsible for the technology if you aren't at least endemically responsible for it from a risk perspective. And I think if we start talking about it that way, that's when I would say, maybe I want to shift some of this risk over to Eric. Maybe I want his team, or maybe I want to shift some of this risk over. And so you start seeing it be much more of a partnership with these people. I got my heart broken with an MSSP. Matt Topper knows when this happened. We hired an MSSP for $7,000 a month to be the people to watch the watchers. That's the way we said it, kind of your point of Tim, wanting to have that separation of duty capability. And so one day someone bought a central authentication domain very similar to our authentication domain. And I started realizing they're phishing, trying to get people to go to that. And I wanted to know how many people got it. So I reached out to my MSSP and I said, how many got this? And they said, well, 3. And I was sitting in the room with 5. The problem was they were just looking at firewall. I said, what about my SIEM? What about all the other data you're collecting? Well, we don't go to that unless you ask us to. So now I'm the quarterback? Well, then you're not an MSSP. You're a service provider of some specific silo of a tool. And I think my point is that if you sold that to an immature consumer, then they're going to consume that and say, I'm good and secure. But it's not that way. It needs good processes on your side. Security is not tools, it's operations, right? It's how I-
Absolutely.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
what I'd like, so Eric and Jimmy, like you guys are working with MSPs all the time, right? Your security pieces they're attaching to the MSP. So given what Matt just said, how do you feel like, is that like what's patterning? Like, what are you guys seeing in the market?
Jimmy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first, and I want to piggyback off what Matt was saying on risk. Like, yeah, you can take that liability and move it towards someone else, bring in an expert into the room. But at the end of the day, like the MSP is always going to see that blowback, even if the courts or whoever or cyber insurance, whoever decides that a vendor or an MSSP or whoever it is was negligent or is liable. At the end of the day, the MSP is the one that lost client. The MSP has got the one that has to clean back up the network. So you still have that diligence, right? And so the watcher has to watch the watcher, right? Like it's like I'm agreeing with Matt's saying with you need to be a quarterback, but at the same time, the quarterback can't be the running back and the wide receiver and the
Exactly.
offensive line.
Yeah.
It's just not possible.
Yep.
So where are you at, Eric? What are you thinking with this?
Well, number one, that's a good point. You have to have the separation of duties, but quite frankly, in smaller business, it's tough, right? I mean, I don't have enough headcount to have, a running back, quarterback, and right? And I certainly don't have enough headcount to have a CTO, a CISO, and everything else on my staff. I just don't have that, right? For smaller business. The challenge that I see as I'm engaging the partner community, the MSP community, really is just a knowledge gap, right? So, I'll start talking to a partner about their portfolio of customers and how they're addressing concerns for that, for each vertical or each customer type. And, we'll bring up regulations and we'll bring up compliance. And I mean, this is like 90% of the time, the only response is, oh, I don't have any medical customers. And I didn't say HIPAA. I just said compliance, or I just said, regulation changes, regulatory changes. I didn't specify, medical at all, but that's the only sort of awareness that they have is this one, thing being HIPAA, and everything else sort of fades to the back. And then we start talking to them and say, well, tell us about your customer base. Tell us about what they do. And then all of a sudden we find that there's accountants and CPAs. Well, they've got, at minimum, you need to have written your security plans for them. And if you haven't, that's a low-hanging fruit item that you guys can certainly tackle for them. But the knowledge gap is the delta is so wide that they don't even know. So how do we help the partner community understand the changes in the landscape? That's the real question. And once they start to understand it, again, from my first point, I feel like people have good intent. So once they maybe understand what the requirements are, and that those requirements are not the same as they were even 2 years ago, then hopefully then there'll be a leveling up and a step forward.
So those are all great. Like, let's do this though. We actually have a quarterback in the room, right? So let's actually hand off to Topper, and because he is the quarterback for Gradient, right? Like, he's the guy that's being held accountable for our security. So Topper, based on what you're getting from everybody here, where are you sitting on this?
It's a really interesting question when I think of Gradient or any company like us versus an MSP and an MSP's clients, because we sit here thinking about the need for the owner of the data to take some responsibility about how it's managed and classified and controlled and all that good stuff around compliance and security. And here for us, I can make those decisions and I can make them informed. And the question is, how do we get, somebody whose primary role is, being an operations manager at some small manufacturing company, how do we get them to even be able to ask the right questions to make those decisions, right? It's like, asking your patient, if you're a medical examiner or a doctor, which drug you want to use. Like, you expect them to make an informed decision. You can't. And so go ahead.
No, go ahead, Matt.
For us, I'm able to make calls based on what we've seen in the market, what I've seen experience, and have been around enough to at least know the categories and classifications of things that I know we should be doing and make informed decisions on how to do it. If you are some kind of person who's been exposed to information security and IT security for the first time, it's this kind of black box of decisions you have to make. And really your ability, your challenge is to help your consulting company, whether you call them an MSP or an MSSP, whoever is helping you make those decisions, give them enough information to help you, right? Tell them enough about your customer base to help them figure out what regulations are you subject to, things like that.
But even then, in my experience, the challenge is deeper than that. So like if you just took a framework centric approach as an MSP, let's say, and you're looking at the components of that, do you mean the MSSP is going to take away local admin rights? Guess what? That's one of them. Limit use of admin accounts. You mean that MSP is going to take over whenever they have a new asset? It's going to be identified? Nope, not really. You mean that MSSP is going to be responsible for doing a business impact analysis to look at every software you might be using so you can decide what that impact is, whether or not I have MFA? Or MSSP is going to be the one answering the insurance form? And I think, to Michael Crean's point, and I do love that man, kind of that shared responsibility matrix. And it's a concept in cloud computing that's kind of unique, but it also applies to MSP, MSSP kind of in that current definition relationships that an MSSP is working with an MSP and doing what I like to call, right? So we have 3 buckets in life. You have what you know, you have what you don't know, and you have what you don't know you don't know. And when you lay that out, you know what you know, at least to the level of Dunning-Kruger principle, but you kind of have contextual anchors to what you don't know, right? You have this, I know this because of this problem. That's how you're aware of it. But then you have this don't know you don't know bucket. And I would propose that most MSPs, and I would also propose that most MSSPs live with so much in that bucket that what our job is to pour that in the don't know bucket. If we can do that, then they can gain that foothold and traction. This goes all the way back to Eric's point of how do we educate? How do we get them to know these things? And I think the point is that MSSPs that have simply said, I'm going to put stuff on your pooter and I'll protect it. Great. Is everybody using those pooters? Is everybody even doing that? Are there people using BYOD devices? Do you have structures to stop that? Do you have things in play? And so I do believe there is room for a non-commoditized security play in the SMB space. And I would even say my MSSP definition goes away when you get up into the larger enterprise space. So take this with a grain of salt. But if you imagine someone on an Azure Active Directory or Okta identity, extended into only SaaS applications with the abilities to put in things in Intune like Matt and I did for years of blocking out such things, taking away access. You can't just run Dropbox. You have no local admin. As you get into that kind of understanding, even an MSSP could script and automate most of that experience and could hire a few great advisors to have the conversation. Technology itself, in Matt Lee's opinion, is dumbing down and it's becoming simpler. Nobody calls me to put Angry Birds on their phone, right? Those are just done. And so my point is, as you start seeing centric identities and going away from an infrastructural world that has so many more of those moving pieces and to much more of an identity centrism, then you start seeing a place where MSSPs could do that quite effectively, but would still need to counsel them on the things and the decisions they make. Are you choosing the right software? Are they going to be able to support this? Do they have good application security? Is Jimmy, when he builds his software, building it with good software development life cycles in play? Are these things? And so there's so much more into the don't know you don't know bucket that as you start to understand that, I think you can really grasp what's wrong with this picture. And I think it's going to create a lot of opportunity and a lot of market share for MSPs to pivot as they're becoming commoditized to being that advisor and then finding the partners to cover the gaps in their controls. If they can't do Control 7 that says do continuous vulnerability management and patch, then you find someone to partner with. You find a software or a service or a human or an advisor. And as you start having that framework, I think what we'll find is the MSSPs will have a map and the MSPs will have a map of where their lanes live in providing services that don't scale well in an MSP, right?
Absolutely.
And certainly don't scale down.
I agree. So Ola, I think so. We had a series of questions lined up here, and I know this group will go down the rabbit hole on every one.
We sure will. So a few of the other questions we wanted to touch on as well was, are you an MSSP or are you just security focused? What parameters should people be following to be an MSSP? Let's scale it back a little bit because you guys make great points, but what are the parameters they should be following?
Magic, just make it up. It doesn't matter. It's all marketing crap.
Well, that's what I feel out there. When you Google, when you go to the magic box of knowledge and you say define MSSP, they'll all say managed security service provider, right? And depending on which website you have, it lays it out. But that's my point is where's
Is
Yeah,
it
but
all
this is a
marketing
bad,
though?
this is a
Like,
bad premise. This is all marketing. This is a bad premise, right? Like
no, but
MSP, MSSP, who cares? What
is
let's
is
look at
there?
risk and how are we taking care of the
Yeah.
risk?
Are you ever going to see like an RFP or some guideline somewhere or some requirement somewhere that requires MSSP and literally lists it out as MSSP, and there needs to be a definition for legal purposes?
There was a push towards that a couple years back, but again, it's marketing. So again, it's sort of like who cares? But I saw Kramer just put something in there. It's about adequately identifying the risk or concerns from a customer perspective. It doesn't really matter who's doing that, right?
Yeah.
So the things that need to be done here, really, it needs to start with asking more questions, right? It doesn't matter what I'm going to call myself when I go into an environment and I'm taking over some degree of their networking or their security or otherwise. Well, what do you do? What do you, what kind of business are you in? What kind of data are you handling? It just very simple questions like that. The 5 questions, the 10 question questionnaire will at least get you to the point where you understand, do I need to take a step further? So let's say they're in insurance or in mortgage or in whatever. We know they've got PII. We know they've got all this data. Okay, great. Now the next step for me, I would think, would be to assess formally, right? Or informally, right? So go through, whether it's CIS, whether it's NIST cybersecurity framework, whatever it might be. These are things that almost every MSP, I would think, and certainly those that are calling themselves MSSP, would be able to at least start asking these questions, right? And informally going through this cybersecurity framework and at least seeing what's there and what's not there, so that category of not knowing, that gap diminishes, right? That sector diminishes, and now we have more information. With more information, then I think you would then say, do I have the capacity to address these concerns? And that's where you then need to start looking at partnership, whether that's partnership with a SOC SIM company, and you're still going to be the fulfillment arm, or whether that's fully passing it off and the baton to another MSSP that's going to be autonomous, whatever those things are. But whomever is currently in charge of and tasked with securing or managing that organization needs to start asking questions of their customer.
So what you hit on that. So that's perfect. Here's my question. What is security? Right. So we're talking MSSPs, we're talking this. My question is, what is security? Because security for a bank or a pediatrician is quite different than security for a manufacturer, right?
Nope.
Not really. No.
There is zero difference. Security, in my definition, is the understanding of risk, both operational, technical, and regulatory, and making decisions on your risk tolerance on how you plan on either mitigating, walking away from it, or ensuring it. And the point is that when we start thinking about it in that framework, and that is security, your bank behaves differently because they have a higher risk of no longer being a bank when they don't pass that audit, right? That's the motivator from a financial perspective. And manufacturing had maybe the threat actors won't steal the F-35 parts on manufacturing, but that's now shifting into CMMC. So I think the same concepts, Tim, of security just being this constant understanding your risk. If I open a new business line or I try on a new software, there's risk. Guess what? Businesses are great at dealing with, is there a risk in my dump truck? Do I need to have a second dump truck? Am I going to need to, they get that. But when you start getting into servers and computers, they've always made it I'll let Matt Topper, the smart guy in the room, make that decision, and acting as if they're non-participatory. I think that's the difference. Banks are being forced to be participatory, Tim. That's why you were early on in securities, because they said, I have to. Same reason for me. I had an 800-171 regulated company that gave a crap, and they decided they wanted to lean into it. And so I had to learn those gaps. But as I started to understand them, Tim, I realized these are gaps very inherent in what we have to do. I can't just say I'm a car manufacturer and not test it for crash test dummies, right? And nor can I say there's this fatal flaw. Can we put in another airbag? At some point, the fatal flaw must be changed and the system must change. And I think that's where I see this deep partnership between a security person's responsibility as an MSP or whoever they are. And you're going to start seeing, I believe, that play out. If you look at CIRCIA, which is in the omnibus bill, that is the Critical Infrastructure Reporting Act for cyber incidents, that basically said, MSP. It didn't say MSSP. It literally said, if you are touching the data, you have a responsibility to report it, which means you got to have a way to detect it, write it up, have a taxonomy for reporting. Understand, you're watching the world say, you can't be responsible for the data and not be responsible for the security. Just like
So-
you can't be a
so
home
we
builder
just-
and not follow
so-
the rules.
Well,
So
right,
I
and
referenced something earlier in this conversation, right? Like I don't even know if they teach it anymore, which is the OSI model, right? So we're
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
about data, but let's go to number one. Let's go to that physical layer, right? Like, is this covering that as well? Because I don't know how many times that I walked in to do an audit or whatever I was doing personally, and the networking equipment and the 1 or 2 or 3 servers they had are mounted in the women's bathroom.
Yep. But that's changing. If you started a company tomorrow, is there any chance you buy a server? If the answer is yes, it's probably because you haven't realized what's out there, or you're in a vertical that requires it.
But I'm
But
talking about
ultimately,
like, so
Yeah,
so
but
let's
what
go
I mean is
bigger.
nobody
The
gives a crap
physical
about the
layer.
business. Nobody
The,
cares.
the physical layer is important. To
everywhere.
answer your
yeah,
question,
it's still
certainly
important. Like if you have a server, it's part of your risk analysis of, right?
But if
Is
you're
it,
in an identity centric, you don't. It's a different
Yeah.
world. Your
Well,
Starbucks
unless-
is your network.
But with that being said, so let's say you go out and do Starlink, and Starlink's on top of the building, right? And there's no way for anybody to get there. It's secured, whatever the scenario is, and you're running functionally 100% wireless. Is there still the physical layer responsibility if you are pushing towards an MSSP? Right? Like we can talk about the data, but it seems like there's multiple layers to this.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
all a
clean
risk.
desk policy, all that, but
Yeah.
but what one conclusion that we're coming to is the way MSSPs are marketed does not imply covering all layers of security. It implies covering one very, very, very specific area of security.
Yep.
And MSPs, not MSSPs, are doing the other 80%.
Yes.
Not
Agreed.
well,
and
but they're getting
that
there.
can't be that can't be. There can't be that gap between
Yeah.
I've secured these endpoints and then you handle everything else.
Right?
There's got to be a marriage there somewhere.
Yeah.
So what's everyone's feedback? How do we bridge that gap?
You learn.
Learn.
I don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
start identifying and mitigating risk. I mean, it all starts there. Once you've identified the risk, then you start mitigating it in whichever way you need to. So if it's physical controls, put those in place. If it's wireless controls, put those in place. And
So
then
how
and then document.
Hey, preach it, Eric. Because
But
if you didn't
then-
document it, it didn't
Document for
happen.
God's sake.
But then how do I, as an MSP, where do I start to focus, right? Like, is this something I have in-house? Is this something I have externally? Like, do I go to an Eric? Do I go to a Jimmy? Do
Yes.
I hire someone?
Those are all questions that
All
you
of
have
those
to ask.
questions.
Those are all questions that have to be asked every day
Yes.
about every client, and
Yep.
the answer is different per client.
Amen. Yeah.
So you take
100%.
on a new client, or that client changes the way they're structured. You may need to change the way that you're structured.
Every single control in CIS says comma space or when significant enterprises changes occur, right? And the point is, Tim, I think to your point, we need to be holistic about it. Where do you start? You start with the crappy policies you're doing today and you map them to a framework. And then you iterate upon those policies and you get better at it. You weed out the customers that you cannot support with what you have, and you reduce your risk, or you choose to insure it, or you choose to move it to a different way. And that doesn't change. It just changes how much knowledge you have of it. Right, Tim? Look back when you were auditing banks. How much more did you learn after that second audit than you knew that first one? Right. And that kind of space.
Well, here's what I'll tell you. This is something I actually want MSPs to hear, understand, and adapt. Like when I first started getting audited, it just pissed me off, right? I'm
Bro,
like,
you and me
who are
both.
these people coming in telling me I'm not doing it right? And I'm a big dude, right? And it's like, I'm like, if I can physically intimidate this little geeky dude that's like,
I'm going to get through
auditing
this
my
on this
stuff,
audit. Yeah.
like I want to do it. And then what happened is, with a little bit of time and a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of understanding and some grace bestowed on me by people that are smarter than I am, what I finally realized, what these guys were showing me the way, right? They were
Yeah.
a year, 2 years, 3 years ahead of their time. And if I would just take them as a partner and not a threat to my business, then I could actually utilize the reports they're giving me to implement across every
Preach it.
company that I was working with. So it became this thing where I no longer seen the auditors and the examiners as an enemy, but instead I seen them as a source of knowledge, showing me where the industry was going.
Yep.
You bring up a great point. There's such an adversarial combative relationship between the assessor, auditor, consultant that comes in and the service provider, and I get it, right? At some point, it's like, someone's coming in, they're grading your work, and maybe your grade's not that great, right? But you have to look at that and say, okay, it's not the auditor that's making these demands, and it's not the end customer that's making these demands. There are some requirements in play. There is some risks at play that I just need to better convey to my end client, and then we can all level up together. It doesn't have to be a battle, right? It's not me versus you. It's really about us working together to understand what's going to best serve that end client, and hopefully we can do so in a somewhat affordable way.
You know,
Go ahead, Doctor.
you kind of unintentionally brought up a point I wanted to make, though, Eric, which is that it kind of ideally should be and needs to be the end client making these demands, right? Your end client should be saying, I need to be compliant with this so that my business can keep running, rather than you as the MSP pushing it down. And it's hard to do.
Yeah, but unfortunately, that's literally why they hired you, right? Like, I don't know anything about plumbing, so I hire a plumber, right? So I want that plumber to come in, or Matt, you said the doctor, right? Like, I don't know anything about surgery, so I'm going to go to the doctor, and when he suggests that I need to do something, all right, well, what do we need to do? You're quarterback now, right?
I thought that's what YouTube was
that
for.
actually highlights a bit of our problem too. I think we have a catch-22 as security and overall technology professionals. There's not many other spaces where professional courtesy isn't given to professional data, right? In the sense that you go in a doctor and he says something about my blood pressure, I don't ask him to show me how the vessel walls create additional pressure because of Bernoulli's principle. And right, I don't get into these concepts because there's a certain amount of trust. Same thing with my attorney, my CPA, my other things. My prediction is that the only way we solve this going forward is there has to be barriers to entry. There has to be something that says, yes, MSP, you know what the outcome is that you need to achieve, the questions you have to ask them, right? The ones you should know, like my plumber doesn't go, man, you want your poop to roll uphill or downhill, right? It's pretty well laid out how they want to do the plumbing. There's regulations and guidelines. And I think we're going to start getting to a point where there's a base level of what needs to be done. As to who does it, as to what the name is for the marketing title, as to who's doing it, it doesn't matter. It needs to be done. And I think my prediction for MSPs is if you don't lean into understanding that totality, somebody else will. And I think whether it's an MSP, MSSP, or whatever definition marketing gives it, we're looking at a cliff in our world. And I do believe that we're going to see that changing in many, many ways over the near future. So I do think, though, to Matt's earlier point, that it's the customer's responsibility, but they have more of a gap in their don't know bucket than everyone else. And there's not very set regulations. In fact, the way the US is approaching it is much more chaotic. If you look at what the next predictions are, they're going to start doing this against people from a HIPAA perspective that have received money from the feds on that side. Now you look at every person that's never cared about HIPAA, but HIPAA doesn't have any set regulations. It just says reasonable. Well, now you get into, I'm going to sue you for reasonableness. How do you defend against reasonableness? It's exactly what Eric said about 7 minutes ago. You write it down. If it's a crappy policy and you're following it, write it down and prove you're following it. It's far better from a reasonable perspective in a defensibility status to say, why'd you pick SentinelOne? Man, it was that new hotness, bro. I love S1. Everybody's buying it. Or it's because Control 10 says that I need to have an EDR. 10.1 says it needs to be centrally managed. And even though I love Defender with Microsoft, it's not centrally managed. So I cannot count it in this category. But 10.2 says I need to auto update. You start getting into, if I'm telling that story to 12 peers, I met reasonableness because I made referential objects to things that everyone else has said is necessary, no matter what type of industry you are. And on the same boat, you can spend $1 million protecting $1. And so I'm not advocating that we go to the nines on everything for security. I'm simply saying, back to Eric's point, we find out the reasonable answer for our client based on regulatory or non-regulatory, their own risk, their own kind of image, and then you make a decision. And you have that in a way that you're consultative with that other human that owns that company. And I think part of this challenge is we will have to teach our clients, because if they don't give us the professional courtesy to trust us, then we have to educate them. We have to do it with anecdotes. We have to do it with things that aren't directly tied to the tech because we can't. And so you get into this hard challenge where there's a lot of challenges that line up for doing this successfully. And everyone shares a piece of that responsibility. Client, us, everyone.
Let me ask this. And I'm gonna specifically pick on Jimmy here. So do you find that the clients that you're working with really care, or are they just trying to hit a ticky box? Right? Like it's like we have to explain it to them. We have to educate them. But in the end, like I know when I was servicing MSPs, right, or when I was an MSP servicing clients, a lot of time they wanted me to tell them what they needed. They didn't really care. They just wanted to do so like they're a dog food manufacturer. They want to make dog food. They don't care. They just want it to work and they want to be secure. So what do you find as someone who's working with these people on a regular basis?
Well, now, and I'm working with MSPs, not the end users, but the conversation has changed. Most people are coming to us because they are part of some peer group, some security group, like Galactic Advisors is a great example of one, right? They're going through a list and they're telling people like more like that. I'll use that very specific example. They're saying you shouldn't have static admin accounts for all of your customers. You know, here's a script on how you can rotate in your PSA. Kind of works. You know, you got to maintain it, or you can work with XYZ, Passportal, QuickPass, whatever companies, right? Like, so that's where a lot of people are coming, and then they're coming. I'm getting questions. How do you comply with CMMC? How do you comply with NIST? Do you have a control mapping? Do you have shared responsibility matrix? And most of the questions, I will say, are questions that indicate that the person asking the question doesn't have a complete understanding of what they're asking. But I'm getting a lot of really good questions from people who do totally understand. And part of it's because the regulation changes like every year, and there's no like, you know, like now we're talking about SPAs, right? And us and Eric's probably having the same conversation on SPAs because these new guidelines. But like last year we were talking about, you know, 2 years ago we were talking about that. It's all new. So yeah, I mean, I think it's changed big time where the MSPs, it's not like, will this improve my security? Sure. It's like, okay, here's a specific area I'm trying to level up in. Here's where I heard about this area and why I need to level up in it. And we're getting more questions, and they're trending up on the education level on where the questions are coming from.
So you're finding the MSPs you're working with, and Eric, you can probably jump in here too. There's a knowledge gap, and they're coming to use it. It's no longer like I need rotating passwords and who are the 10 out there and which one can be my partner. It's now the conversations are becoming more intelligent and more educational based around, hey, Jimmy, hey, Eric, why is your product important to me? And how can I go through to make sure that this is good for my clients? Because my clients want to make dog food. They want to make widgets. They want to take care of babies. They want to mess with your money, right? That's what they're depending on the MSP for.
I want to add to that. Go ahead, Eric. You go first.
I'll tell you this. And this is only in the last 2.5 years, I've seen more interest now coming from, and this may be to Topper's point earlier, from the end client than anyone. And that wasn't that way before.
Yeah.
So
Thank
you're kind of right.
That's regulated though. You
Right,
play in a very
so
regulated driven space.
Well, no,
but even look at travelers
not just
insurance and what it's done to the
exactly what I'm saying. So for the insurance alone, hey, I got this insurance that my MSP told me about in 2018, 2019. Now I got the new policy, and they got all these questions. I don't know how to answer these, so we get those. The other thing is supply chain, right? So even if I'm way down the line, I'm not the federal contractor, I'm not the subcontractor. Right. But I do business with someone that does business with someone, and they've just made a blanket policy now that anyone that they're interacting with has to level up or at least answer a questionnaire. So we're getting a lot of demand now from the end client coming to the MSP, and this is where the partner has to. They can't put their head in the sand, because if the clients come to them with a question, they're already behind. Because if they're the incumbent MSP and the client comes to them and says, well, hey, my peer, my neighbor, my whatever, at our association group just said I should be worried about these 5 things. You've never talked to me about it. And you're my guy. You've been my guy.
Yeah, you failed. You must not know.
You failed.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's that's a great point. I love that. So expectations, right? That's what I want to hit on. Is if I'm an MSP providing service to a client, and I don't regularly set the expectation of what I'm doing, then that MSP thinks it's just like when I was an MSP, Eric and I talked. If I had gone to Eric and contracted his company for his services, then quite honestly, anything that's quote unquote security, I would think that that's Eric's responsibility. It's now Eric's responsibility with me as the MSP, my responsibility with the client to properly set the expectations on a regular basis of what you're responsible for, what you're covering, and what you're not. Because I guarantee you those end clients and those MSPs, they just naturally think you're encompassing all of it.
Well, and what is the problem.
Yeah.
What is the is the problem. I think the challenge is this. There's a taxonomy problem that we all share. And I am advocating people to lean into, whether it's NIST CSF, whether it's CIS, if you as a vendor were to say, hey, I am the outsourced management of 10.1 through 4. I am the outsourced management of 7 from a scanning perspective, but you own the actual remediation of 7.3 and 4. And you do the 3 and I have to do the 2. And if we were to start tying it to some taxonomy that is always the same, that we can reference, you could start setting the breadth of that for your client of saying, here is what CIS or the Center for Internet Security said is the bell curve of risk. Everybody know what a bell curve is? Great, let's move on. So if that's the bell curve, and this is 56 IG1 controls and 97 IG2 and IG3 controls, we're going to focus on this first implementation group, Mr. and Miss Client, over the next 4 quarters. I'm going to show you how we're going to cover 1 through 4, 5 through 7, 8 through 10, and you start having a common taxonomy. The problem we live in, just like with Carter's snake oil pills, is you just slap another label on it. Now it's XDR, and another label, and it's MDR, and another label, and at the end of the day, they originally said, no, you got to tell us what this drug is. It has to be evaluated. It has to be sold. They didn't get in and tell you how to make drugs. They didn't get into, but they started setting up a taxonomy. If we were to lean in as vendors and as practitioners and as the way we educate our clients into using frameworks as the centricity of explaining things at a high level, well, why do you want to take away my local admin rights? Johnny gets mad every time you do that. Well, because that's the best way somebody can destroy me. Even Matt Lee can destroy you with admin rights. So you now get into this understanding of making educated decisions, not super technical, but then showing, by the way, here's Sock Soda and here's where they fit in on this. And they're my partner that helps me do this piece. And then you're not even talking about the point that none of this matters if you have no effective policy to govern it, process that you're following, and documentation and proof you're doing it. And so you get into, where does that live? You think that's going to be the MSSP? Is it going to be a shared form? Is it going to be something that starts here and ends there? Is it going to be a policy with delineations in it? And all of that stuff we're going to have to get better at. But I pitch this. Tim, MSPs have gotten good at doing this over time. If you look back 10, 15 years ago as an MSP, look how much was missing and how much process exists today. Look how many VCIOs exist that didn't, and strategists, and bringing in vCISO and bringing in all these things. So we're getting there, man. We're all flexing our muscles and we're walking. I just think we're missing a taxonomy. And I think using those frameworks as a taxonomy is huge.
That's such a huge point.
On-
Like, Tim, you were talking about OSI before, right? And, nobody uses a network that's pure OSI, right? Especially the upper few layers. It's all over the place, but it's universally used as a point of reference when you're talking about things. And having that in the security space would be just awesome to be able to everyone. And of course, the which one do we use is going to be what blocks this forever. But having some type of industry standard, right?
They're okay.
just picking something and being able to ask a potential product or solution, where on this grid do you fit, or where do you claim to fit, would be so huge for everyone.
Yep, I agree. Jimmy, you had something.
So like we're saying, we're all agreeing, we need like universal standards, we need to speak the same language, all this. And we're kind of agreeing that regulation is going to come for MSPs if it hasn't come yet, and it's going to be one form or another. Cyber insurance or the government or something's going to come in and say you need to follow whatever standards for MSPs. But at the same time, we're all saying MSSP doesn't mean anything. And if you don't have a definition for it, you can't regulate it, or you can't have a framework for it. So like, are we saying just get rid of the term entirely, or are we saying maybe we need to fix this term and say, okay, this needs to work with these specific standards, it needs to cover X, Y, Z. What do you guys think on that?
No, and I think that's a fantastic point. I think you got to wrap it up, right?
I think
it's like we get rid of it or we fix it. Like there's 2 options, and they both have huge implications.
The good news is all the marketing teams will figure that out for us. God bless them.
Yeah, I was going to say again. These are largely marketing terms that they get sort of intermixed. But the reality is, I think there's always a space for a tried and true MSP generalist to be able to raise their hand and say, hey, I need help.
Amen.
I've had this client. I've had this client for a long time. I've got a trust relationship with them. I don't necessarily want to divorce myself from them. I want to continue to work with them, but I need help, and I need headcount help. I need headcount help, not just tools, right? Because if I just needed tools, I just go to my top five vendors and cobble it together and make it work. But if I need that headcount help to, to really dig
The
in
expertise help, really, right? And headcount. But yeah, both.
and headcount in terms of day to day and all that, right? So
Yeah.
so if I need that, I think there is a space for me to be able to say, hey, I'm calling on an MSP to come in. I'm going to bring them in. They're going to do these things as part of our overall strategy, and I'm going to quarterback, or they're going to quarterback, and we'll figure out who does it. I think that piece is always still going to be important. But as we kind of wrap up here, I think the first thing you have to do, and I don't have Matt Lee's big words, but you have to start asking questions.
I make up
All
half
right,
of them.
so
I know you do.
Eric, that's perfect, because that's where, because we're right at the hour, and I think there's many conversations that this group can continue to have. We can add people in, just there's a ton of stuff that we can do and continue to have these great conversations. So as we are getting to the end of the hour, let's like, what's the one thing, and I'll call you guys out so what is the one thing that if you could drive home to the MSPs looking at becoming an MSSP, or just something you could get out there to start down the path of like, what should you do today? What would that be? And we're going to start off with quarterback in the room. Topper, what would you say? What's the one thing that they should start doing today?
I think the biggest thing is, if you are thinking about MSP versus MSSP, have an open and honest conversation with yourself about who is going to own what, and figure that out. That is the most important thing. And if you're thinking about being the MSSP side of things, really think about what the interaction between you and customers and you and their MSSPs is going to be, and how you'll handle the ownership and responsibility aspect of it, which is a massive question. But if you have to start somewhere, it's right there.
All right, Jimmy, you're next up. Other than what you popped in, what's the where do you see it?
I think, listen, I'm at a trade show and I talk to someone and I'm selling a cybersecurity product and explaining it, and someone walks up to me and says, "Listen, I'm an MSSP. I'm a managed security service provider. I can't use your product." Like something's haywire there, right? Like something's not working right. I think I personally think that a move for MSPs to rebrand themselves as MSSPs is not a smart move. Maybe more security centric or security folks first, or we partner with an MSSP. And I'm okay. Personally, I'm okay with MSSPs who provide the more older definition of like a SOC as a service, calling themselves that. That's just my opinion.
Awesome. Eric.
I really don't give a crap what people call themselves, to be honest. It makes no difference to me. If I'm the service provider, the best thing I can start to do is really starting to ask some real questions of my customer base, and dig in and start to really understand what the risks and concerns are, maybe ahead of even their discovery of that, right? So I want to understand what my customers are doing, what type of data they're moving around, and then start to assess that risk informally. If every partner were to start there, I think we automatically would level up as a community, and then from there, we have to stop grabbing shiny shit, man. Like, man. This idea of MDR, EDR, XDR, NDR.
Hey, listen, I'm from the Midwest. You throw glitter on it, we're going to look at it.
It's all glitter. Every one of these three-letter things is all glitter, and it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing from one vendor to another vendor, or your implementation versus the next guy's implementation. You don't even necessarily know why you're buying it.
Yep.
So ask questions of your vendors, ask questions of your customers, and start to better understand what the concerns are, and then reach out for help if you need it.
Agreed. Yep. All right, Mr. Lee, you got 60 seconds because I know you take 60 minutes if I let you.
Mine's in the same vein. I ditto Eric actually in pretty much everything everybody said so far, in the sense that mine would be simply continue to educate yourself. Be hungry to find more in your don't know bucket, and move it into your don't know bucket and find plans to solve it. And my point is with that is that if you don't understand it, you sure as heck can't ever fight through the marketing fluff, right? Doctors, if they had to fight through these pharmacy reps coming in, or these pharmaceutical reps coming in with all these like, man, I'm here to protect the overall heart conscientiousness. What is that? Oh man, I've got that EDR thing. Don't you know I'm taking care of the extra dialysis response? Like, you can't live that way. These reps had to start saying, no, I represent lisinopril. We reduce blood pressure in the following mechanisms, and you understand that enough to know what the hell I just said. And that's the bare minimum we have to get to, is starting to understand what is the totality of understanding security as it's best understood today. And guess what? There used to be CIS 20, and then it was 18, and it's going to shift, and CSF's going to shift. They're going to add in service providers. There's no service providers in the old version of CSF. You just have to understand that this is a real profession. This is not going to be a trunk slamming endeavor. Either way you want to look at it, I don't care. And if you think you can be the MSP that says, man, I ain't responsible for that there security, fine, it will catch up to you. So the point is, just go get educated. You can make the right decisions after that. All that becomes a negotiation, and talking to Michael Crean at Solutions Grand and say, I need you to cover this piece for me, or Eric at his company, you need to cover this piece, or Jimmy, hey, I know you're in account management and Control 5, and you speak towards having unique administrative passwords in a gap where I can't have unique administrative passwords. You solve that for me. It's needing to know those things so that these people like Jimmy don't have to market the crap. And I'm not accusing you of that, Jimmy. I love you. Your marketing's fine. My point being, we've forced this condition by being stupid. And we have to change that, myself included. So
I'm gonna wrap this thing up and thank all of you for being on. And I would say, I agree with everything that's everybody said here, right? Like, we're chasing glitter. Acronyms don't matter. The work does. Be questionable, auditing, constantly see what that next piece is, constantly educate yourself. And, if you don't know, there are plenty of people out there like Eric and Matt and Jimmy and Matt and myself that are more than happy to just ask a question. We're all here to help each other. That's what I love about this industry, is this industry wants to help each other. And with that being said, gentlemen, Ola, thank you so much for trying to wrangle this crazy group of people. But thanks everybody for jumping on. Thanks for having the conversation. I would almost guarantee you're going to see something coming down the pipe where there's going to be more conversations. If not on this, we'll definitely tackle a different subject.